Hey there, hope all are doing well. So I have spent about a year now off and on shooting both the X-T3 and the X-T4 Fujifilm cameras, kind of simultaneously, mostly using the X-T4 for video and mostly using the X-T3 for stills. And I've come to some conclusions having used both. And so this might help anyone who's kind of trying to consider between the two which to get. Or if you have an X-T3, to consider whether it's worth upgrading or not. So here's my thoughts on the matter. Number one, my Sawtooth Day 2 video, the film is on its way back to me as I make this video right now. So probably that will be next week's video. The second thing I'd like to cover is my box set, which is over here over my left shoulder, is selling wonderfully well. 25% of the limited edition is already pre-ordered. Thank you, everyone. Very much appreciate that. And the third thing I'd like to mention is that Douglas is my newest Patreon supporter. And thank you so much, Douglas. I really appreciate the support. And I have reserved a limited edition box set number for you. Okay, so now on to the X-T3, X-T4. The first thing I want to talk about, or the first thing I need to say, is that the image quality of both the X-T3 and the X-T4 is identical. It's the same processor, it's the same processing engine, and it's the same output. So there's nothing in that. The cameras can produce equally stunning work. And both are highly competent and probably the best APS-C sensor, imaging pipeline that's been made to this point. Once you get used to the X-Trans sensor and figure out how to use it and how to implement it to best effect. Okay, so having said that, the first thing that I'd like to go over in terms of the differences between X-T3 and X-T4 is the IBIS, in-body image stabilization. The X-T4 with some lenses, Fuji claims gives 6.5 stops of stabilization. And now the X-T3 will have image stabilization, but it's in-lens image stabilization, and you have to use a lens that has image stabilization because X-T3 does not have in-body image stabilization. My 10-24, my 18-55, and my 55-200, which are the three lenses I like to use the most for landscapes, all have stabilization. My Fujicrons, the 16, 23, 35, and 50, f2s, f2.8 on the 16, don't have image stabilization. So when I put one of the primes on the X-T4, or my XS10 for that matter, which also has in-body image stabilization, those lenses become stabilized. Not that big a deal. What's more of a big deal is the 6 stops versus the 3 stops. So with Fuji, like with the X-T3, when I put a stabilized lens, like the 10-24, on my X-T3, I get approximately 3 stops of image stabilization. With the X-T4, I get 6 stops of image stabilization. It's almost to the point where it's almost like the X-T3 doesn't have any stabilization at all, even with the lens stabilization. The X-T4 image stabilization in 6 stops is really stabilized. Now, most of my work is done on a tripod, and most of the time I turn the stabilization off. But when the stabilization is nice, particularly for video, number one, and that's how I use the X-T4 and the XS10 mostly, is for video. So it's nice to have that stabilization when I need it. But also I've noticed that like the last day of my Zion trip, I was exploring some new areas, and I just wanted to explore compositions. I didn't really want to be locked down on a tripod. And it was really nice to be able to just handhold the camera, the X-T4 in this instance, and photograph with that image stabilization on and not always have to be tied to a tripod. It's something that I need to explore further in the future. But it's kind of exciting and kind of liberating to be able to use the in-body image stabilization and combined with the lens stabilization, and regardless with the X-T4 to get 6+ stops of image stabilization, it's something that I want to pursue more in the future, and maybe use the tripod less. That's kind of a liberating thought. The X-T4 has a setting in the menu where you can save your self-timer setting. And I find that that is an extremely useful feature. With the X-T3, I find myself, because on a tripod, when I'm shooting landscapes, I tend to use the 2-second self-timer to kind of mitigate any vibration before I take the shot, because usually my exposures are, you know, half a second and slower. So, so I use this 2-second self-timer a lot. And on the X-T3, it seems I'm always having to turn the self-timer, 2-second self-timer back on. The X-T4, that's not a problem because there is a menu item that says save self-timer setting, which is the way it should be, to have the option to go back and forth either way, however you want it. The XS10, interestingly, has that menu item as well. So I was kind of hoping, it's just a small piece of code, and I was kind of hoping that Fuji with Kaizen would upgrade the X-T3 to have that. And there's no reason why it shouldn't, why they couldn't do that. I think they just haven't gotten around to it. So another item that's kind of like that also as well, which could be implemented in X-T3 but just hasn't yet, and I'm not sure it ever will be, is when you are reviewing your images on the back of the camera, the joystick in playback mode actually zooms your image, which is brilliant because usually when you zoom your image, the next thing you're going to do is use the joystick to move around in the image to check focus. Couple that with the 1.6 million dot LCD on the back screen, and it's really easy to check focus with an X-T4. You basically go into playback, hit the joystick button to zoom, and then just keep your thumb right there and move the joystick around to see what part of the image you want to see. And the 1.6 million dot rear LCD does a beautiful job at helping you determine whether your focus is correct or not, etc., or to check details in the corners, that kind of thing. Now on the X-T3, it's not quite, there's issues there. So first off, you have to hit the rear control dial to zoom after you hit playback, and then you have to go to the joystick to move around the image. And then when you're zoomed in, the rear LCD on the X-T3 is 1 million dots versus 1.6 million dots on the X-T4. So I would like to see the implementation of the joystick zoom on the X-T3, but quite honestly, the X-T4 is a better camera to shoot with for what I'm doing in that instance. The one area where the X-T3, I prefer the X-T3 LCD over the X-T4 for stills work is I prefer the way the X-T3 articulates, or the way it flips out. The X-T4 has a fully articulated screen which swings out to the side, and you'll notice on this X-T4, on my X-T4, I don't have, this is an L bracket, it's a VI Mahogany L bracket, which gives you an enhanced black wooden grip, which is nice. And I use the grip and I use the Arca Swiss plate on the bottom a lot, but I have removed the L portion. I have it in the bag in case I need it, and it's just a simple matter of screwing it on the bottom. But most of the time I run it without because I'm mostly doing video with this camera. But when the L bracket's on, the LCD doesn't articulate well. It doesn't move all the way out. It doesn't work. It doesn't play nice with the L bracket. Now, on the X-T3, I keep the L bracket on all the time. The articulated screen is awesome. For stills, it can articulate in vertical, and it articulates obviously in horizontal. So this is a brilliantly designed screen for stills. Having said everything that I've said, if I had to choose between the two, because I am a hybrid photographer, videographer, I prefer even though it doesn't play nice with my L bracket, I would prefer the X-T4 screen. So another win for the X-T4. These are all minor things, but they all add up. Another thing that the X-T4 does better than the X-T3 is switching back and forth between stills and video. First of all, you have the switch under the shutter speed dial. But the next thing that's important is that when you do switch from stills to video, in video mode, you get only the video menus, and in stills mode, you get only the stills menu. It just makes it cleaner and faster to operate depending upon which mode you're in. It's a cleaner break because video is not stills and stills is not video. The X-T3 is a totally usable and great video camera with great output, but the X-T4 is better, particularly when you're switching back and forth between stills and video. And now let's talk about battery life. So this is the new W235 battery that's in the X-T4 is kind of a blessing and a curse. And why it's a blessing, why I say it's a blessing is because in future, when more Fuji cameras are taking this battery, like, you know, let's say 5 years from now, when we've kind of switched over to most of the Fuji cameras, although, I mean, the new XS10 takes the 126 battery. So I don't know what's up with that, but let's hope that in future they'll be using the 235 battery. So when that happens and we can just use a bunch of cameras with just the 235 battery, that'll be great. The curse part of it is now I have to bring 126 batteries, and this 235 battery only fits one camera I own. Thomas Heaton solved the problem. He just bought another X-T4 and just runs two X-T4s. Yeah, that would work for me, except that I don't have Thomas Heaton's money. And I already have, you know, an XS10 and an X Pro 3 and an X-E3 and an X-T3. So, and all of them are capable. It's just not convenient, okay? But the majority of the Fuji cameras that I own take the 126 battery. And, you know, it sounds like, I mean, that is whining to a certain extent, and it's a high quality problem. But the reason why I'm whining about it is because the 235 battery in the X-T4 really doesn't solve the problem. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's not a Sony Z battery. And the Sony Z battery in an A7R4 or A7R3 or all the cameras that take the Z battery solves the problem. In the sense that when you run a Sony camera with a Z battery, you don't worry about the battery. You have a spare, but you rarely swap them, okay? In the course of a day, you don't. I didn't run into that when I was shooting the Sonys. So, so that solves the problem. This 235 battery is not like that. Okay, with the 235 battery, you know, I have to swap the battery and I have to watch it because it goes down pretty quickly. It's not as bad as the 126, but I still have to watch it. I still have to worry about it. It's still a concern. And I still have to bring other batteries and I still have to swap them. So it didn't solve the problem. To be honest with you, I wish the X-T4 had the 126 battery. That would be easier for me. At least I know I have to swap it every half hour. With this, I'm swapping it every 45 minutes or every hour. That's not solving the problem. So, all right, I've gone on that. I don't think you're going to hear that anywhere else, though. The 235 battery is not as good as the Sony Z battery. That's all I'm going to say. Is it an improvement? Yes, it's an improvement. And I'm looking forward to the day when I have more cameras that take that battery. But in the meantime, and for the next foreseeable future, I think it's going to be I'm running two different batteries that don't really solve any of my problems as far as batteries are concerned. Another big difference between the X-T3 and the X-T4, on the X-T4, the shutter, I don't know what they did to the shutter mechanism, but it is like butter. It is absolutely silent. It's absolutely smooth. It's not silent, but it's very, very quiet. It's very smooth. It's a really beautiful shutter to use. A minor detail, and I'm not sure how that affects anything else, but it's just a pleasure to use. When you switch back to the X-T3 and it goes clunk, not quite the same thing. The shutter on the X-T4 is really a pleasure to use. Okay, so in summary, if you have an X-T3 and you shoot mostly stills and very little video, I wouldn't upgrade. The X-T3 is a great camera. There's nothing in the X-T4 that's you're really going to notice as an improvement, and I wouldn't worry about it. Okay. If you have an X-T3 and you have a need for video, yeah, I would consider upgrading to an X-T4 like I did, or at least maybe an XS10. Yeah, so I would upgrade if I had an X-T3 and I was doing a lot of video, definitely. The X-T4 is really the better hybrid camera. And particularly if you're a solo content creator, the screen sticking out at the side really solves the problem. So as much as I love the other flippy out screen the X-T3 has, if you're doing video and you're a solo content creator, the fully articulated screen is a much better option and really solves the problem. Now, if I didn't have an X-T3 or an X-T4 and I wanted one or the other, just go for the X-T4. And particularly right now, as the X-T3 is $14.99 brand new US dollars, and the X-T4 is I think $16.99 US dollars. For $300 more, that's a no-brainer. Get the X-T4. Okay. But just to make things complicated, if Fuji ever runs another sale where the X-T3 is $9.99, then the waters get a little bit muddier. If the X-T3 is $9.99 and you don't see that you have a real need for a lot of video, I think I'd go with the X-T3 over the X-T4. So, yeah. And I would definitely go with the X-T3 over the XS10 if they're both $9.99 and you don't have to shoot a lot of video. So that's my summation. Honestly, all of these cameras are fantastic cameras and they do the business. The video output is stunning. The stills images are fine art quality in my opinion. My box set is, you know, and the prints that I make from these cameras, I mean, they hold their own with my 4x5 film output. So, and that's saying a lot. You know, I can put images from my 4x5 film output and from my Fuji APS-C X-Trans 4 sensors, and to a certain extent even my X-E3 third generation X-Trans sensors, and I can put them all in the same box. It's that good a quality. So, okay, so that's what I think of the X-T4 versus the X-T3, having used both for over a year now, off and on. And if you've been interested in that, I really appreciate you watching. And thanks for the support. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and we'll see you out there. Have a great one. Bye.